What if I told you that everything you believed when you studied history in school is a lie? We've come to think that before the arrival of Europeans, North America was nothing but endless forest. But that's a colossal misconception. Are you ready to learn the shocking truth about the continent's greatest settlement, which vanished without a trace in just a few decades? This isn't just an archaeological find, it's a real-life thriller hidden beneath the earth. Imagine this. A vast metropolis with a population of over 20,000 people flourished in a wide river valley, surpassing the London and Paris of that era in both scale and wealth. Local engineers, whose names have been erased from human memory, created an incredibly complex system of gigantic earthen platforms, vast open spaces, and powerful fortified districts. And the strangest thing of all, they left behind not a single written record. Not a single letter that could explain their triumph or their downfall. Be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because we'll piece together the chronology of this catastrophe bit by bit. You'll discover what fateful chain of events led to this colossal center of ancient civilization being plunged forever into absolute ominous silence. Was it an epidemic? The wrath of the gods? Something far more terrifying? What was found in the old archives completely changes our understanding of the architectural capabilities of the builders of the past. The central element of this vast settlement was a colossal earthen mound consisting of several spacious terraces at different levels. To create this gigantic foundation, workers manually carried millions of heavy wicker baskets filled with carefully selected soil. Engineers used various types of local soil, laying them in precise layers to prevent dangerous subsidence of the entire structure. This massive platform served as a reliable foundation for the main administrative buildings and the homes of the most influential members of society. Dozens of other earthen platforms were arranged around the main structure, forming a precisely calibrated geometric grid of city blocks. The space between these platforms was skillfully leveled and covered with a thick layer of compacted white sand brought from afar. This light-colored sand created a perfectly flat surface for large-scale public gatherings and important ceremonial events. The builders incorporated a complex system of subtle slopes that effectively drained rainwater away from the city's central areas. Thanks to this expert planning, the main squares always remained dry even after the heaviest and longest downpours. The unique system of defensive structures consisted of a massive palisade surrounding the entire central part of this vast metropolis. The wooden wall was made up of thousands of massive cedar trunks, deeply dug into the ground and tightly pressed against one another. On the outside, this continuous wooden barrier was carefully covered with a thick layer of fire-resistant clay to protect against possible fires. At regular intervals along the entire wall stood special observation platforms, providing an excellent view of the surrounding areas. The construction and constant maintenance of such a colossal structure required the incredible efforts of hundreds of experienced lumberjacks and skilled carpenters. The process of harvesting timber for the city's needs was a large-scale and well-organized industry. Workers used heavy stone axes to fell centuries-old trees in the dense forests surrounding the river valley. The trunks, stripped of their branches, were transported via a complex network of waterways directly to the construction sites of new structures. Such logistics made it possible to supply materials not only for the construction of the defensive wall, but also for the ongoing expansion of residential neighborhoods. Construction crews worked in unison, erecting new structures in strict accordance with a unified architectural plan. The city's residential quarters were divided into distinct rectangular sectors, connected by wide, straight streets. The homes of ordinary citizens were sturdy frame structures, clad with dense mats of reeds and rivergrass. The roofs had a steep pitch, allowing heavy winter snow to slide down easily without damaging the supporting pillars. Inside each house was a sunken hearth, lined with smooth stones to evenly retain the life-sustaining heat. Such standardization of housing indicates a high level of social organization and centralized management of urban resources. Particular attention was paid to creating spacious communal areas within each individual residential district. These small open spaces served as places for daily interaction among neighbors and for jointly performing various household tasks. Here stood large communal kilns made of fired clay, where women simultaneously prepared food for several families. Wide canopies made of woven bark were stretched over the work areas, providing pleasant shade on hot summer days. This arrangement of urban space helped strengthen social bonds and maintain internal order. To store strategic food reserves, the city built special ventilated granaries on tall wooden stilts. This design protected the harvested crops from groundwater and ensured constant circulation of fresh air. The walls of the granaries were additionally coated with thick clay, which created an ideal microclimate inside the spacious rooms. Responsible storekeepers kept strict records of all incoming resources using complex systems of knots and notches on wooden slats. The judicious distribution of accumulated reserves allowed the city to safely weather even the longest and harshest winters. The metropolis's water supply relied on an extensive network of natural streams and artificially dug canals. Clean drinking water came from springs located on high ground outside the dense urban area. Residents regularly cleared the channels of these springs of fallen leaves and silt, maintaining high water quality. Water from specially equipped reservoirs connected to the main river channel was used for domestic needs. This separate system demonstrates a deep understanding of sanitation and hygiene principles in such a large settlement. Industrial zones were located on the outskirts of the city so that smoke and noise from the workshops would not interfere with the daily lives of most city dwellers. Here, hot kilns burned continuously, firing durable ceramic tableware of various shapes and sizes. Nearby were spacious areas for drying harvested timber and processing plant fibers for weaving. This entire production complex functioned as a single mechanism, providing the city's population of 20,000 with everything they needed. The city was an autonomous and incredibly productive system, striking in its complexity. Studying the layout of this ancient center reveals a society with outstanding abilities for cooperation. The engineers of the past created a city that functioned successfully in harmony with the surrounding landscape for centuries. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about such grand urban planning projects of antiquity? Share your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting historical research. I discovered this by chance while studying reports on excavations of ancient agricultural lands. The economic power of this massive city was entirely based on an incredibly productive system of floodplain agriculture. The main source of calories for the metropolis's inhabitants was hardy, high-yielding corn adapted to the local climate. Huge fields stretched for many kilometers along the riverbanks, occupying every patch of suitable land. The fertile silt, regularly deposited by spring floods, served as a natural and very potent fertilizer for these crops. The process of tilling the land required enormous physical effort and the constant coordinated work of thousands of people. Farmers used massive stone hoes, securely fastened to long wooden handles with strong plant fibers. The soil was thoroughly loosened, after which even rows of tall earthen mounds were formed for sowing seeds. This planting technique protected young sprouts from possible frosts and ensured excellent drainage of excess moisture. The fields were regularly weeded so that the corn stalks received maximum sunlight and nutrients. Along with the corn, various varieties of climbing beans and broadleaf squash were grown in the same fields. The beans enriched the depleted soil with essential nitrogen, and their vines conveniently twined around the tall corn stalks. The huge pumpkin leaves covered the ground tightly, conserving precious moisture and preventing the growth of harmful weeds. This ingenious combination of three crops allowed for maximum yield from a minimum area without depleting the soil. Taken together, these plants provided the townspeople with a fully balanced and nutritious daily diet. The harvest turned into a large-scale citywide event requiring the participation of virtually all able-bodied residents. Ripe ears were carefully cut with stone knives and placed in huge woven baskets for transport. In special open areas, the corn was spread out in a thin layer to dry thoroughly under the warm rays of the autumn sun. Well-dried kernels were separated from the cobs and placed in airtight ceramic vessels for long-term winter storage. Pumpkins were cut into long, thin strips, which were then dried in the wind until they became stiff ribbons. Preparing food from the harvested crop was a complex, multi-step process that took up a significant part of the day. The dry corn kernels were first soaked in water mixed with wood ash, which made them softer and more nutritious. The swollen kernels were then ground for a long time on heavy stone mills until a homogeneous, thick paste was obtained. The resulting dough was shaped into dense flatbreads which were baked on hot flat stones near the hearth. Dried beans, squash, and edible roots were placed in large clay pots, turning into a thick and hearty stew. To provide food for the vast population, the abundant resources of the full-flowing river and countless lakes were actively utilized. Local craftsmen wove intricate traps from flexible willow twigs, which were set in shallow waters along the shores. Special groups were tasked with gathering edible aquatic plants, whose nutritious rhizomes were added to daily meals. The harvested aquatic plants were dried and smoked in large quantities on special wooden racks. This made it possible to build up substantial reserves of food that did not need to be consumed immediately. Gathering wild fruits and nuts in the surrounding forests served as an important supplement to the basic agricultural diet. In the fall, entire groups would set out to gather walnuts, acorns, and sweet chestnuts in oak groves. The nuts were carefully shelled and ground into a nutritious paste rich in essential vegetable fats. Successful agriculture on such a scale required not only knowledge but also immense social discipline. The distribution of land plots, the organization of collective labor, and the accounting of harvested supplies were strictly controlled by the city administration. Every resident clearly knew their duties within this vast and complex production system. The well-being of the entire metropolis depended on the coordinated efforts of thousands of people who labored daily in the endless fields. In the next chapter, you will learn how the unique logistics system that connected this city to the most remote regions was organized. What happens behind the scenes often hides the most massive processes, and this city's trade network was no exception. The Mississippi River served as the main transportation artery, connecting the metropolis to the vast territories of the continent. Local engineers created a huge fleet of massive transport boats capable of carrying tons of valuable cargo. Each such boat could hold dozens of oarsmen and a vast quantity of goods, tightly packed into woven baskets. Steering a heavy vessel in the fast-flowing river required incredible physical strength and flawless coordination among the crew. The navigators knew all the dangerous whirlpools, hidden shoals, and the seasonal variations in water levels like the back of their hands. Journeys upstream and downstream took weeks, turning the rivers into bustling trade routes of antiquity. Special way stations were established along the banks for the rowers to rest and replenish their fresh water supplies. The range of goods flowing into this central hub is striking in its incredible diversity and geographical origin. From distant ocean shores, merchants brought huge seashells, highly prized by local master carvers. Pure native copper was brought from the northern regions and used to create status symbols. Shiny mica, mined in the distant eastern mountains, served as the material for crafting intricate ceremonial mirrors. All these rare materials were exchanged for surplus food, salt, and high-quality, locally produced stone tools. Trade took place in specially equipped, spacious areas right in the heart of the ancient metropolis. Light canopies were set up here, under which samples of rare minerals, fabrics, and finished handicrafts were displayed. The exchange process did not involve the use of money, so each transaction was a complex process of barter. Experienced merchants knew the true value of each material and were skilled at negotiating the most favorable exchange ratios. This constant influx of new goods stimulated the development of local craft production to unprecedented heights. Copper processing was also concentrated in the hands of a small group of highly skilled urban specialists. Native copper was carefully flattened with stone hammers, constantly heated over coals to prevent cracking. Complex shapes were cut from the resulting thin sheets, which were then decorated with three-dimensional embossing. These copper plates were often attached to wooden bases, creating impressive symbols of power. The technology of cold forging required immense patience and a thorough understanding of the physical properties of this rare metal. The vast distances traveled by merchants facilitated a constant exchange not only of goods, but also of knowledge. Along with rare commodities, new ideas in architecture, agriculture, and material processing technologies arrived in the city. This cultural exchange made the metropolis a hub of innovation, where the most advanced achievements of the time converged. Residents constantly adapted and improved borrowed technologies, applying them to their large-scale projects. The city functioned as a giant intellectual center, accumulating the wisdom of many different communities. Thanks to this incredible trade network, the settlement gained immense influence far beyond the boundaries of its valley. Its economic power allowed it to sustain a high standard of living for tens of thousands of people over many decades. Complex logistics and advanced manufacturing made this city the true capital of a vast part of the continent. Don't forget to like this video if you're interested in the secrets of ancient trade routes. The secret, passed down from generation to generation, lies in the unique organization of labor in this ancient society. The social structure of the metropolis was characterized by a strict division into specialized groups, each of which performed its own function. At the top of the social hierarchy were the leaders, who lived atop massive earthen platforms in the city center. Their residences were spacious wooden buildings, adorned with intricate carvings and protected by separate fences. These leaders coordinated large-scale projects, ranging from the construction of new burial mounds to the distribution of food supplies. Between the leaders and the common farmers lay a vast class of highly skilled artisans and engineers. These specialists were exempt from heavy field labor, so they could devote themselves entirely to perfecting their unique professional skills. Engineers calculated the angles of inclination for earthen pyramids and designed drainage systems for city streets. Stonemasons, weavers, and potters worked in specialized workshops, creating objects of exceptional quality. The products of their labor were distributed through a centralized exchange system, sustaining the economy of the entire metropolis. Specialists skilled in creating tools for working with hard materials were held in particularly high regard by society. Crafting a delicate flint drill or a sturdy stone chisel required absolute precision of movement. These tools were then used by other artisans to build boats, construct houses, and work with shells. Therefore, master tool makers were considered the foundation of the ancient city's entire production chain. Their work was highly valued, and the secrets of their craft were strictly guarded within professional guilds. The art of pottery was also divided into the production of utilitarian tableware and the creation of ceremonial ceramic pieces. Utilitarian vessels were made with thick walls and large capacities, intended for long-term grain storage and food preparation. Ceremonial ceramics were distinguished by incredibly thin walls, complex shapes, and rich engravings on the surface. Often such vessels took the form of various fruits and were coated with a special compound that gave them a dark sheen. This exquisite tableware was used during important public gatherings and served as a luxury item. Life in each district was regulated by local elders who resolved domestic disputes and organized community work. They ensured the cleanliness of the streets, the condition of the drainage channels, and the proper functioning of the communal bread ovens. The elders were also responsible for the timely repair of palisades and public buildings within their district. This decentralized system of governance allowed for the prompt resolution of emerging issues at the local level. The city was too large to be managed manually from a single center, so local initiative was encouraged in every way. Thus, the social structure of the metropolis was a complex yet highly harmonious and stable system. The strict division of labor was balanced by close ties within communities and the interdependence of various professional groups. Everyone knew their place in this gigantic mechanism and contributed to the common prosperity. In the next chapter, you will learn how the layout of ordinary residential buildings was organized. The residential architecture of the ancient metropolis was characterized by a high degree of standardization and incredible practicality. A standard house was a sturdy rectangular structure built on a framework of thick wooden posts. These posts were driven into deep trenches, which ensured the building's stability even during strong gusts of wind. The space between the load-bearing supports was tightly woven with flexible willow branches, forming a reliable foundation for the future walls. This woven structure was then covered with a thick layer of wet clay mixed with dry grass for strength. The process of applying the clay plaster required the participation of several families and was carried out on dry, warm days. The clay was carefully smoothed with wooden trowels until a perfectly flat and continuous surface was achieved. Once dry, the walls became as hard as stone, providing excellent thermal insulation for the interior. The interior of the house was organized to best meet the needs of a large family in various living areas. At the very center was a round hearth, lined with smooth river stones and slightly recessed into the earthen floor. Smoke from the fire rose freely and escaped through a special vent in the thatch roof. Woven reed mats were spread out around the hearth, where the family gathered for evening meals and relaxation. Sleeping areas were located along the walls on raised wooden platforms, covered with warm animal skins and woven blankets. Every house had designated areas for the safe storage of food and valuables. Large ceramic vessels containing supplies of cornmeal, dried beans, and dried roots were placed along the walls. Under the roof, bundles of dried herbs, baskets of nuts, and skeins of yarn were hung from wooden crossbeams. This arrangement of space allowed all necessary supplies to be kept close at hand while protecting them from dampness. Cleanliness and order in the house were maintained daily, and the floors were regularly swept with bundles of stiff grass. Many houses had small outbuildings that served as workshops or additional storage spaces for tools. In these outbuildings, artisans could work in inclement weather, weaving baskets or making tools. Heavy stone hoes, wooden pestles for mortars, and spare bundles of thatching reeds were also stored here. The doors to the houses were made of solid wooden frames covered with leather or thick woven mats. At night, these doors were tightly closed and secured from the inside with sturdy wooden bolts for safety. The layout of houses within a block followed strict rules that prevented chaotic and uncontrolled development. Building facades were aligned in straight lines, forming wide, straight streets to facilitate the movement of people and goods. Sufficient space was always left between neighboring buildings to prevent the spread of fire in the event of a blaze. Small open spaces were organized at street intersections, where communal wells or shelters were located. This orderliness made the metropolis a comfortable place for tens of thousands of people to live for many generations. The architecture of these modest dwellings demonstrates a deep understanding of ergonomic principles and the use of local materials. The timber frame and adobe construction method proved to be an ideal solution for mass construction, given the limited availability of stone. These houses were warm, dry, and spacious enough for large families to live comfortably. Standardized construction allowed new neighborhoods to be built quickly as the city's population continued to grow. Wooden frames and mud brick walls became the hallmark of this vast and thriving metropolis. Life inside these homes unfolded in strict accordance with traditions and the changing seasons. In winter, activity slowed to a halt, and people spent most of their time by warm hearths repairing tools. With the arrival of spring, the streets came alive, and the entire population headed out to the fields or construction sites. A house was not merely a shelter, but the center of family life, where knowledge was passed down and comfort was preserved. I will reveal the best-kept secret of this city's layout, one that remained unnoticed for a long time. West of the central square, archaeologists discovered the remains of a grandiose structure dubbed the Wooden Stonehenge. It was a huge circle formed by dozens of massive red cedar posts driven deep into the ground. At the center of this circle stood a single main post, which served as an observation point for the city's astronomers. From this vantage point, they closely monitored the sun's movement relative to the outer wooden markers. This structure was an incredibly precise solar calendar, essential for managing the life of the metropolis. During the summer and winter solstices, the rising sun aligned perfectly with specific pillars of the outer circle. On the days of the spring and fall equinoxes, the sun rose directly above the eastern pillar, signaling the change of seasons. These astronomical observations were critical for the timely start of large-scale agricultural work. An error of just a few days could cost the city a huge portion of its harvest, so the work of the astronomers was vital. In addition to astronomical observations, large-scale sporting events played a crucial role in public life. The main sport was the game of chanki, for which a huge, perfectly level playing field was built in the center of the city. The surface of this sports arena was tightly compacted and covered with special smooth sand. The game consisted of participants rolling a heavy, perfectly polished stone disc across the sand. As the disc moved, players threw their wooden spears, attempting to predict the spot where the stone would eventually come to rest. The crafting of stones for the game of chanki was an art accessible only to the most outstanding master stonecutters. The discs were carved from hard rock types, such as quartzite, and had concave sides for perfect balance. The polishing process took months of monotonous labor using sand and water until a mirror-like shine was achieved. These sporting projectiles were considered extremely valuable and were carefully passed down from one generation of players to the next. A high-quality Chonka stone could serve as a valuable item of exchange between different city districts. Sports competitions drew thousands of spectators to the stands, becoming the main entertainment for the entire metropolis. The game demanded incredible physical conditioning, endurance, and perfect eye-hand coordination from the participants. Throwing spears at full speed demonstrated not only agility, but also the skills necessary for survival. The competitions were accompanied by an active exchange of valuables, as spectators placed bets on the victory of their favorites. This contributed to the redistribution of wealth within society and the strengthening of ties between residents of different districts. Astronomical calendars and sports arenas were symbols of the highest level of organization in this ancient society. They demonstrate that life in the metropolis was not limited to hard labor in the fields and workshops. Intellectual development and physical improvement held an important place in this people's value system. The city offered its residents not only safety and food, but also sophisticated forms of cultural leisure. In the next chapter, you will learn what climate changes began to threaten this thriving society. For centuries, nature was this metropolis's main ally, providing its inhabitants with everything necessary for prosperity. The fertile soils of the river valley, the rich forests, and the mild climate created ideal conditions for the growth of a vast city. However, any large-scale urban development project inevitably begins to exert significant pressure on the environment. A population of 20,000 people demanded enormous resources, which were extracted from nature every day. Gradually, the balance between the ecosystem's capacity and the growing settlement's demands began to be catastrophically disrupted. One of the main problems was the rapid depletion of the fertile topsoil on nearby farmland. Year after year, intensive corn cultivation on the same fields drained all the nutrients from the soil. Despite attempts to fertilize the soil with ash and river silt, crop yields began to decline slowly but steadily. Farmers had to clear increasingly remote sections of forest for cultivation, which complicated logistics. Transporting the harvest from distant fields to urban granaries required ever more time and human resources. Global climate change exacerbated the region's already difficult ecological situation. The warm and stable period that had fostered rapid agricultural growth gave way to a time of unpredictable weather. An era began that modern scientists call the Little Ice Age, bringing colder temperatures and droughts. Winters became noticeably longer and harsher, shortening the vital growing season for corn. Late spring frosts often destroyed young seedlings, forcing farmers to take risks and replant their fields. The drop in crop yields immediately affected the city's ability to maintain its complex social infrastructure. Supplies in the central granaries, which had previously ensured security during the winter months, began to dwindle rapidly. The city administration was forced to impose strict food rationing across all segments of the population. This inevitably caused discontent among ordinary farmers, whose hard labor no longer yielded the expected results. Social tensions grew as the once overflowing ceramic vessels holding grain reserves emptied. Heating homes during harsher winters required enormous amounts of firewood, which exacerbated the problem of deforestation. Gathering firewood began to take up most of people's time, distracting them from repairing infrastructure. Residents had to conserve fuel, which made living in the timber-framed houses less comfortable. Constant cold and meager rations led to a general decline in strength and a drop in labor productivity. The city, accustomed to abundance, was completely unprepared for such sudden and prolonged climatic trials. The townspeople tried to adapt to the new conditions by changing their planting methods and reinforcing the earthen platforms. They built additional protective dikes around the main squares to save the center from sudden floods. Astronomers closely monitored the sky, trying to find patterns in the new chaotic weather shifts. However, no engineering tricks could halt the global climate change sweeping the entire continent. The settlement's immense size, once its greatest advantage, had now become its most vulnerable point. The environmental crisis vividly demonstrated the fragility of even the most highly developed civilization in the face of nature. The survival of tens of thousands of people depended on a delicate balance of temperature, precipitation, and soil fertility. When this balance was disrupted, all of their complex social and architectural achievements were threatened. A critical factor that accelerated the metropolis's decline was the catastrophic deforestation of the surrounding areas. The city literally devoured the surrounding forests, using the wood for construction, heating, and industrial needs. Building a massive palisade around the center required the felling of tens of thousands of mature cedars and oaks. Wood rotted quickly in this humid climate, so the wall had to be completely rebuilt every few decades. This endless cycle of construction and repair turned the city's green outskirts into barren plains. The disappearance of the forest triggered a chain reaction of environmental problems that took a toll on the city's infrastructure. Tree roots no longer held the soil on the hillsides, leading to widespread erosion. During heavy downpours, streams of muddy water and silt washed directly onto the city's streets and squares. Drainage channels designed to carry clean water quickly became clogged with heavy silt and ceased to function. The streets turned into impassable swamps, destroying the carefully planned architecture of the residential neighborhoods. The absence of forests has also altered the microclimate in the valley itself, making it harsher and windier. The trees served as a natural barrier, protecting the croplands from the parching summer winds and winter blizzards. Without this protection, the soil in the fields began to lose moisture more quickly, which exacerbated the effects of increasingly frequent droughts. Strong winds damaged the thatched roofs of houses, requiring constant repairs to the roofing structures. The city lost its green armor and found itself face to face with the raging elements. To find high-quality timber for new construction projects, loggers had to venture farther and farther from the city. Transporting heavy logs for tens of kilometers required the colossal efforts of hundreds of porters. The logistics of supplying the city with fuel and building materials became incredibly complex and energy-intensive. Workers spent most of their time not on creative labor, but on the mundane task of delivering firewood. This led to a general slowdown in construction and the inability to maintain the existing infrastructure. The lack of scaffolding directly affected the quality of the houses being built in the city's new neighborhoods. Instead of sturdy cedar posts, builders began using less durable types of wood that rotted quickly. Building frames became less reliable, making them vulnerable to strong storm winds. People were forced to dismantle old abandoned structures to use their components for repairing their homes. The city's architectural appearance, once striking for its grandeur and uniformity, began to gradually fall into disrepair. The administration's attempts to limit timber consumption were met with the harsh reality of climate change. It was impossible to forbid people from lighting fires during harsh winters or repairing roofs damaged by the wind. A shortage of basic building materials arose, leading to increased social tension within communities. Neighbors began arguing over the right to gather fallen timber in nearby woods, something that had previously been unthinkable. The resource shortage was destroying not only buildings, but also the very fabric of this complex and organized society. The history of deforestation in this region is a classic example of resource depletion. Builders erected a magnificent metropolis, but the price of this grandeur proved too high for the local environment. The city literally cut down the branch on which it had sat so confidently and comfortably for centuries. Against the backdrop of environmental disasters and climate change, the city's social structure began to show serious cracks. The complex hierarchy that had previously ensured order and prosperity could no longer effectively cope with the new challenges. When the central granaries ceased to guarantee protection from famine, the trust of ordinary farmers in their leaders was severely shaken. Small groups of people, weary of constant deprivation and the harsh climate, were the first to begin leaving the city. They gathered their few belongings, dismantled the sturdy wooden frames of their homes for firewood, and departed. These groups headed south and east, where the forests were still intact and the climate remained milder. They preferred to build new small settlements that did not require such complex infrastructure or centralized management. Life in small communities seemed to them a much safer and more stable alternative to the crumbling metropolis. The migration process was slow at first, but over time it gained momentum that was alarming to the city. With the departure of each new group of farmers, the burden on the remaining residents only increased. The shrinking workforce made it impossible to maintain the vast drainage systems and endless cornfields. Abandoned plots quickly became overgrown with brush, and without proper care, the mud brick houses began to crumble in the rain. The city began to shrink, like shagreen leather, leaving behind empty, crumbling neighborhoods. The decline of trade ties accelerated the exodus of skilled artisans, who could no longer find work here. Master stonemasons and potters followed the farmers to offer their services in new, developing settlements. Their departure dealt an irreparable blow to the industrial might of the ancient center, stripping it of its status as a technological leader. Workshops closed, kilns cooled, and barter squares emptied. The economic heart of the metropolis, which had been beating for centuries, began to slow down and inevitably stop. Those who remained in the city tried to maintain their familiar way of life, but this was becoming impossible. The vast ceremonial squares seemed empty and out of place for a population that had shrunk several times over. The astronomers by the wooden calendar could no longer predict the weather, which had become completely chaotic and unpredictable. Religious leaders were losing their authority as their rituals no longer brought the long-awaited rains or a warm spring. A spiritual crisis gripped society, robbing it of its last hope for a return to former glory. Migration became not merely an escape from problems, but a conscious choice in favor of decentralization. People realized that giant megacities were too vulnerable in the face of large-scale climate and environmental changes. They chose to return to a simpler but sustainable way of life in harmony with the environment. This was not the collapse of civilization, but its profound and sweeping transformation in response to new challenges. By the beginning of the 15th century, the once bustling metropolis had finally sunk into absolute and oppressive silence. The last few remaining inhabitants gathered their belongings and left the valley forever, leaving behind the grandiose earthen structures. The exodus concluded as quietly and methodically as it had begun, without panic or visible destruction. The people simply took their tools, pottery, and knowledge with them, disappearing into the vast expanses of the continent. The enormous city, which had once housed 20,000 people, became a ghost town, lost amid the river mists and tall grass. The only reminder of its former grandeur were the colossal earthen pyramids rising above the plain. These massive mounds, whose construction had taken millions of hours of manual labor, proved impervious to time. Overgrown with dense forest and tall grass, they blended into the landscape, transforming into mysterious man-made mountains. For centuries, their regular geometric shape and enormous size concealed the secret of a vanished civilization. New generations of people who came to these lands had no idea they were walking the streets of an ancient metropolis. The artifacts left in the ground, fragments of skillfully carved shells, stone hoes, and shards of pottery, silently bore witness to the past. These objects lay in the earth, waiting for the moment when new researchers would be able to decipher their hidden messages. The cornfields had become overgrown with wild shrubs, and the complex drainage channels had turned into natural streams. The vast arena for playing chank had vanished beneath a layer of river silt and fallen leaves several meters thick. The great center of trade and crafts had turned into a massive archaeological site, hidden from human eyes. The disappearance of this city became one of the most striking examples of the fragility of complex urban systems. They created an architectural and economic marvel that could not survive the clash with climate change. Their story is not a tale of catastrophe, but a lesson in adaptation in the search for new ways to survive. The people did not vanish without a trace. They simply changed their way of life, becoming the ancestors of many modern cultures. The knowledge and technologies that originated in this metropolis spread across the continent along with the migrants. Silent burial mounds continue to rise above the river valley in the mist, guarding their age-old secrets. They remind us that even the most monumental creations of human hands can prove powerless against the forces of nature. This lost city will forever remain a symbol of human ingenuity and a reminder of the fragility of our existence on this planet. We have explored the history of one of the most incredible and enigmatic ancient metropolises, whose rapid rise and quiet disappearance continue to captivate the minds of researchers. Grand earthen pyramids, complex engineering systems, and extensive trade networks prove that this city was a true center of technological and cultural thought in its time. Studying the causes of its decline teaches us vital lessons about the fragility of the balance between society's growing needs and the limited resources of the environment. Do you think a similar scenario of ecological and social crisis is possible in modern megacities? Or are our technologies capable of preventing such consequences? Please suggest topics for future videos that you'd like to see in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to continue uncovering the mysteries of history with us.